Hello guys, my name is Gregory and I would like to welcome you in Mastello Coffee Institute. You're watching this because you forgot how to dial in your grinder. Well, don't worry, it is fairly simple, but especially at the beginning of your barista journey, it might seem overcomplicated. We work on so-called grind-to-demand grinders. That means that working on this grinder is way easier. However, it requires an extra step when you dial that in. Let's start with some basic informations. For our espresso, we need to follow our recipe. Recipe includes amount of coffee, amount of water, and time of extraction, which means basically how long water is going through the coffee, which is in the basket of our portafilter. As for Mastello coffee, we need 17 grams of coffee, about 50 ml of water, and brew time of about 24 seconds. As long as amount of water you need for your espresso is already programmed in your coffee machine, amount of coffee you need for that espresso, and the grind size, which is responsible for how long that water will be pushed through that coffee, has to be programmed on your grinder. What is a grind size? It basically means how big or how small coffee particles are. This is a key factor of time of your extraction. If you imagine yourself a bucket of sand and a bucket of stones, both buckets would have exactly same volume, and we're gonna put exactly same amount of water over both buckets. What would happen? With a bucket of stones, the water will flash through it very fast. With a bucket of sand, it will take a while. Exactly same thing happens with your coffee. If your coffee particles are very small, we're gonna call them fine, the water will go through that coffee very slowly. If the grind size is way bigger, we're gonna call that coarse, the water will flash through it very quickly. As mentioned before, we need about 24 seconds of extraction time, which is from pressing the button till the machine's gonna turn off the dose of water. Bad news, there's no scientific way to check how big or how small your grind size should be. You have to remember that weather conditions gonna affect your coffee beans. Depends how long coffee is in the hopper, when it was roasted. Is it rainy day? Is it sunny day? Is it warm? Is it cold? How busy you are? All these conditions will affect your coffee. Please remember, you should check is your grinder properly set up at least a couple of times a day. Definitely when you open in a coffee shop, then probably just before the lunchtime and maybe after lunchtime to check is everything okay. It is also a very good practice to check your time of extraction every so often to make sure that your espresso is always spot on. So let's say our espresso is being poured for about 10 seconds. This is way too fast. That would mean that the coffee particles are way too coarse. How do we change that? On Fiorenzato Grinder, you're gonna change the grind size by moving the dial, which is placed just underneath the coffee hopper. Please mind the lock, which keeps the dial in position. You would have to press it first to move the grinder. On the grinder, you will have information which direction you have to choose to make coffee finer and which direction you have to choose to make it coarser. Well, of course, all these informations are in Italian. Therefore, we have fine, which means finer, and grosso, which means coarser. What do you need to dial your grinder in? A coffee scale. A paper cup is very handy. And, well, grinder. The first step I always recommend to do is to check where we are with our grinder. How do we do that? I'm gonna use a paper cup to manually dose amount of coffee we're looking for. In our case, it's 17 grams. I'm gonna place the cup on my scale and I'm gonna zero this. And now I will manually dose myself 17 grams of coffee. It's still missing a few bits. Now I have way too much, so I'm gonna take it out using teaspoons. Now I know I have exactly 17 grams of coffee I need, and machine is programmed for amount of water I need to brew my espresso. I will transfer coffee from the cup into my basket. And I will brew my espresso. Use the timer, which is in your mobile phone, and start the timer at the exact moment when you're gonna press the button. You should use the button you normally use for double espresso. Well, we had only 10 seconds. That means coffee is way too coarse and we need to move it into the finer direction. In this case, it's anti-clockwise. At this point, I should dispose one dose after changing the grind size. You want to make sure that the coffee you're gonna use for another espresso is all after the change of the grind size we just made. Now I will repeat the same steps. I will dose myself 17 grams of coffee and I will put it through the machine. Again, using my timer, I will check the time of extraction. And this time we have 35 seconds, which is way too much. That means that our coffee is too fine. We will have to move a bit back with our grind size dial. This time I'm moving grinder clockwise to make it coarser, and I'm repeating the whole process again. And this time we have exactly 24 seconds, which is the time of extraction we're looking for. What does it mean to us? We know grinder grinds us coffee at exact grind size we need to achieve 24 seconds of extraction time if we have 17 grams of coffee. Therefore now we have to do an extra step and we have to make sure that grinder will give us 17 grams of coffee every single time we're gonna ask it for. This grinder cannot weight coffee. It doesn't know is it 17, 15 or 38 grams of coffee. It works in the simplest possible way. Whenever you ask a grinder to grind you some coffee, it activates a motor for a certain amount of time, and that time can be changed by us. What you have to remember that changing grind size will affect the dosing of the coffee. Whenever you make coffee coarser, you open distance between the blades. Therefore, in the same amount of time, more coffee will go through the grinder. If you're gonna make the coffee finer, you close the distance between the blades, so in the same time, less coffee will go through. That means that if your grinder used to give you exactly 17 grams of coffee, and you change the grind size into coarser grind size, grinder will now give you more coffee than it used to before. If you're gonna make it finer, it will give you less coffee than before. There is a very simple mathematical equation to check what exact value we have to dial in the grinder to get 17 grams of coffee. First, you want to check how much coffee exactly grinder is giving you now. At this point, grinder gives us 16 grams of coffee. To get into the dialing, you have to press and hold double cup button. That will bring you to the menu. The first step is a grinding time. You press OK. Single dose is a first step in your menu. We pass that by pressing OK again. And we have double dose seconds. In this point, we have 4 seconds on the grinder. That means then within 4 seconds, grinder will give you 16 grams of coffee. And now to the simple equation I just mentioned. In your calculator, you put value you have on the grinder now. In this case, 4 seconds. You divide that by the amount of coffee grinder gave you within 4 seconds, which is 16 grams. Now, all you have to do is to multiply that by 17 grams, so a value we're looking for. That brings us to 4.25. And that's the value we're looking for. This grinder shows you only 1 decimal place, so we're gonna leave it on 4.3. Press OK. And now your grinder should give you exactly 17 grams of coffee. It is very important to monitor your time of extraction during your work to make sure that every espresso you serve is spot on. Whenever you need to change the grinder, do so. If you get lost during dialing the grinder, just go back with this video and check it again. It seemed very difficult, but it's not. And believe me, after a few times of doing this, you will do it with your closed eyes. That'll be it, guys. Thanks for that. Good luck! Make sure your espresso is always perfect.